I'm Ruth Mandel. I'm director of the Eagleton Institute of Politics. Really pleased that you've joined us tonight for this is the 7th annual program of the Louis J. Gambaccini Civic Engagement Series. I know some of you have been with us for some of the previous programs. This series honors a man whose record of thoughtful public service is decades long and universally respected. The only regret we have is Lou can't join us sometimes for these evenings, and he can't do it tonight, but we find ways of getting the information to him and having him see what goes on in his name. The Gambaccini program celebrates Lou's leadership with a theme that's dear to his heart, and he talked to us about it quite a lot over the years, toward better citizenship. I have a feeling that is fairly relevant these days. In its short history, the series has featured very impressive speakers, among them former Massachusetts governor and presidential candidate Michael Dukakis, Washington Post columnist E.J. Dionne, MSNBC host Chris Matthews, Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, and Congressman John Lewis, as well as an outstanding panel of young leaders who came to talk to us about their work in the realm of politics and social media a couple of years ago. Once again, tonight, we've hit a home run, the jackpot, whatever image you prefer. While the work of tonight's distinguished speaker is in the realm of journalism, and it certainly embodies the Gambaccini program's mission, this occasion tonight also has a special reunion feature to it because we're welcoming back to Rutgers one of our own. In fact, an alumna, I'm so proud to say, of the Eagleton Institute's undergraduate associates program, class of 1998. So she's like really young, and she's gone on to do these amazing things in the world. She's gone on to do very well indeed. When we first reached out to Carrie Budoff Brown to congratulate her on her new job as editor of Politico, she responded with warmth and enthusiasm, not only as an alumna, happy to reconnect, but as a professional journalist, eager to give back to a community that helped to shape her career. And she's very generous in talking about how much we did for her. It was a wonderful reminder of what has long been true of our Eagleton community, our Eagleton family, that our capacity to serve our current students effectively depends in large measure on the commitment and interest of our alumni. More than ever, we appreciate graduates who stay in touch with us, find ways to give back, report in from the political fray, and offer guidance to those aspiring to follow in their footsteps. Case in point, Carrie Budoff Brown. She began her career in journalism in what we would now call the old media, even before college, working at the York, Pennsylvania Daily Record the summer before her freshman year. At Rutgers, she served as editor at the Daily Targum. She interned at the, by the way, she's actually done more than I'm able to list here because the list is pretty long, but just to give you a sense of some of the places, she interned at the Richmond Times-Dispatch and the New York Times Trenton Bureau. She worked as a staff writer at the Hartford Courant and the Philadelphia Inquirer before arriving at Politico in 2007, and that was a month before it was launched. Between 2009 and 2014, she was the White House correspondent for Politico. Later, she also covered the Senate, Barack Obama's 2008 presidential campaign, the 2010 passage of the Affordable Care Act, and many other legislative efforts on Capitol Hill. She received the 2012 Merriam Smith Award for Excellence in Presidential Coverage Under Pressure in the print category. As a founding member and managing editor of the Politico European team in Brussels, Carrie served as a bridge between newsrooms in Washington and Europe, leading Politico's coverage of the debt crisis in Greece, Europe's migration challenges, Brexit, and terrorist attacks in Paris and Brussels. Returning to the Washington area in fall 2016, that was just yesterday, a long, short year ago, she assumed her current role just after the presidential election. In such challenging times when all of us are confounded, not only by the news itself, but by attacks on the media reporting the news, we need to draw on the wisdom of observers perched on the edge of the abyss, or perhaps it's the swamp. As we're bombarded with some shocking, often conflicting information, it's invaluable to be able to turn to an old friend for interpretation and clarification, if not actual reassurance about what we're witnessing. So I'm beyond happy to welcome Carrie to the stage now for a conversation about all of that. We're going to start off with, I'm going to ask some questions. She chose to use a conversation format instead of a speech format, so I'm going to be asking some questions, and then later we'll turn to you to add a few of your own. So please welcome Carrie Budoff Brown. Madame.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Should we go over there?
Over there.
Ready?
I'm going to bring my many questions with me. We're going to start in a way that, frankly, before... I don't bring this.
There's one over here.
Oh, is it over there? Okay. Yeah. Before some of the more recent events, the very more recent events, the conventional way to begin this, and we want to stay with that, especially given who she is, the fact that she started here, the fact that she is an alum who is more than willing to say very good things about what her Rutgers experience did for her.
Yeah.
We're going to ask her to talk about that a little bit and tell us how she went, what happened here at Rutgers for her, and then how she went forward.
So I applied for college back at a time when I don't think it was as intense as it is now for kids. I grew up in York, Pennsylvania. My parents are here, actually. And my father...
I get to take a bow.
No, that's okay. They know who they are. That's all right. And I applied to Rutgers. My father went to Rutgers, and my sister was going to Rutgers when I was applying for school. And I just thought, oh, I'll apply there. I'll apply some other places. I got into Rutgers and went and wanted to come here and thought it would just be cool. I did not want to go to Penn State, where I grew up. I loved that Rutgers was in a different sort of geographic area than the very rural area where I grew up. And but really came here not quite knowing what I was doing in some ways. I, by happenstance, interned at a newspaper in my hometown the summer before I went to Rutgers. Loved it, and was lucky enough that I picked a college or university, even though this was not part of the calculation, that had a daily student newspaper, which was an invaluable platform to learn journalism. You could make mistakes, you could have camaraderie, you sort of figured it out as you went, and so that was really transformative in terms of the experience I got here, and I just got lucky. I told it wind up in part because I didn't really take the whole where am I going to college that seriously. I knew Rutgers was a great school. I thought I'd become a lawyer one day, happened to sort of fall into journalism, went to a school where there was a great daily newspaper and got great opportunities, which led to my junior year being an Eagleton fellow, which was just a wonderful way to, have this sort of wonderful small experience with 20 of my, really intelligent, smart classmates and learn from great professors. And it was just probably the highlight of my college career. And I'm not saying
was scripted.
Yeah, I'm not saying that because I'm sitting on the stage. It really, truly was. And I got these opportunities that one thing led to another. I think, looking back, I just got lucky in a lot of ways. Lucky that I chose Rutgers, even though I wasn't serious about where I was choosing to go. And got lucky that I actually found programs that really worked for me. A daily newspaper, Eagleton, and being an intern at the New York Times Bureau in Trenton was another thing. A woman, the bureau chief at the time there, gave me the job because she felt that the Princeton kids had too many advantages in life, and that she gave the internship slot there to a series of Rutgers students or public school kids. And there's where Rutgers, the Rutgers advantage worked over the Ivy League advantage. And I was able to drive to Trenton 3 days a week while I did my Henry Rutgers thesis. And so and that led to my jobs after college. So, I didn't plan any of that. I got lucky. It really is a direct line to, I feel like, where I am now.
One of the things that we really insist on over and over again for students is the value of internships for the direct learning, for the networks, for a little window on different parts of the world so that you can know about it. You might not have been introduced to it before. So what advice do you have any, especially today, given what's going on in journalism, do you have advice for undergraduates or graduate students who might be thinking about journalism or might be enticed to think about journalism?
Yeah, it would be
especially if they're interested in politics. I'm not really talking about the fashion page.
Yeah, I would say, I think they should just go do it. There's lots of opportunities to write and be a journalist, and you should just go do that. And don't tweet opinionated things either. I've spent time at dinner talking about this, but I think, as an editor of a publication, we do look at Twitter feeds of the folks that we're considering hiring, and I think a lot of kids, younger people these days, don't think that stuff carries with you. And I think if you want to have a career as a journalist in the way that I grew up as a journalist or in a nonpartisan news organization, think about what you put out into the world, if that's the kind of journalist you want to be. And I think go out and be a reporter in the country. I grew up at a time where there were great opportunities for journalists at newspapers. The summer between my junior and senior year, I said I just applied to newspapers all around the country, internship programs, and ended up going to Richmond, which I'd never been to. And that was by choice. I wanted to go to a different part of the country that I had never been to and get experience. I had that opportunity after college, covering a couple towns in South Jersey where I was forced to learn how you be a journalist. You have to go to a town hall every day and return the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and that meant that you had to write stories that were fair and were accurate, and you had to go face the people you were talking to, and I don't think people have as much of an opportunity to do that. Everything you think you can do over computers, over emails, and in fact, we have, and I think what I learned by being a reporter in a small town is that what we do matters, what we do has an impact on people, good and also bad, if you don't take it seriously. And I realized by going back every day to these towns that I covered that, what I wrote had an impact, and I had to keep that in mind as I did my job, and I thought that taught me really valuable skills. So I would say go out and be a reporter in a community.
Could you give me an example of an impact? That level, I don't mean now.
I think
in a small town,
I would write things that would change what small town governments would do, I think impact is just, you're the only person there with, who has eyes on what government officials are doing. I don't think we have enough of that right now. You've seen so much contraction from newspapers that all these programs that I had available to me coming out of college in the late 90s, I went to the Philadelphia Inquirer because they hired 40 young journalists every year for 2 years and covered all these towns from Westchester to South Jersey. That program doesn't exist anymore, which means that not only are students not getting that opportunity, those governments are not being reported on. That's huge, and that's pretty bad. So I think that, I don't know where I was going with that.
It's okay.
But
that's what we hear all the time.
I lost my train of thought.
That's what we hear all the time about the State House.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I mean, when I was in the State House Bureau in Trenton, that whole, I don't even know if it still exists, but that whole area was filled with reporters. And from what I can tell, the New York Times doesn't even have an office, right, in Trenton anymore. They literally don't have an office. There were 6 people there when I was an intern. And so just think about that for a second. That's a frightening notion.
About what we don't know,
Yeah.
what we don't see.
Yeah.
Right.
But what we do have, Politico now has staff in New Jersey, staff covering the governor and the state legislature. But we're never going to, we had this notion a few years ago that we could put a lot of reporters in the states hoping to make up for that gap. And the economics of it are still very challenging. We're figuring out a way to make that work. But I think we initially had this notion that we would go into all 50 states and fill that gap for the local papers, and there's still economics involved in journalism, and it's still a challenge. We're committed to it. We're still there, but it's taken some evolution to sort of get to where we need to be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Leading from that to Politico and the experience of Politico, would you tell us about it? What's its niche? What's its structure? How is it different from other publications?
Yep.
People might not really know, even if they run into it online.
So 10 years ago when it launched in 2007, it was a different time, like in a lot of ways. I guess most clearly it was before time. We came onto the scene at the same time that Twitter and Facebook were becoming obviously more of a player. But we rose up with Facebook and Twitter, and before they became what they are now, we were sort of the Twitter for Washington, and we reported on every twist and turn of what was happening in Washington at a very sort of frenetic pace, faster than the bigger other news organizations in Washington. And the idea was you were meant to be the ESPN of politics, everything you ever wanted to know about what was going on at the Capitol, the White House, campaigns, lobbying, influence. So it's the idea is that we have a clarity of mission. We report on politics and policy for people who have an interest, whether it's personal, financial, in that realm, and that we don't care. For many years we didn't care how many people read us. We cared about who read us. And the idea was that if we could make the most powerful people in Washington feel like they had to read us, then others would want to read what those people wanted to read or had to read. And I think that clarity of mission has helped differentiate us. We don't attempt to be a general interest publication that spreads itself too thin. Now we have 25 million people plus unique visitors every month. It makes us one of the biggest political news organizations in the country. And we've had pushed the desire away to sort of become a bigger mass political news organization, because we do feel like what we have works. We have, we're making more money this year than we have last year, and that's important. Journalism will thrive only if there's money that supports it, and that I care deeply about making sure that I have a newsroom that can do its journalism and thrive and grow and be and hold people accountable. And at the same time, I have to make sure that is not losing money. That we figure out a way to make money to support that good journalism. So I think what makes us different is that we just write about politics and policy in Washington. We have half of our newsroom are policy reporters who are embedded in the federal government, pretty much. We made this investment in policy reporting, and I think it's paying off. I don't think there's no other news organization in this world that can say that they have the journalists that we have, the amount, the depth in terms of where they are between the United States and Europe, where we now have 100 reporters and editors covering Brussels, Paris, London, Berlin, these regulatory capitals. And I think that's a pretty important group of people doing important work at this time.
Talk a little bit about the demographic, who you're looking for in the audience, and you've alluded to it a little bit, and what are the demographics there, and who do you wish you had?
Yeah, so our audience is, primarily, the bulk of it is in sort of the Washington, D.C. area, but we have, a lot of readers in New York and California and Texas. Tends to follow where they're just sort of big sectors of the economy. Obviously California it's because of tech, and New York it's because of finance, and Washington it's politics. And it really ranges. I think our demographics pretty much mirror what a lot of other news organizations of our kind is. We get about 30% of, on the younger end. We get quite a few on the older end. Some of our most loyal readers are, I think one guy is like a retiree in California who literally subscribes to every single one of our newsletters. But it really does span the spectrum in terms of who reads us. But what we do care is that, when we put out Playbook, which is our morning newsletter, that that every senator and member of Congress is reading it, and chief of staff is reading it, and we know because we have we have the data that shows that, and people in the West Wing are reading it, and that and we do care about that. That's the way it works right now, and that's important to us.
Yeah, in a way, it really does sound like and feel like, for those of us who read it, a community, right? You're in a community, and everybody is talking or listening to other people in the same community. It's different from reading a print newspaper.
Yeah, that is the idea, and I would say the competition for that audience is much greater today than it was 10 years ago too, so we're constantly having to make sure that that we're offering something different than our competitors do. And I think what we do offer is that we just sort of flood the zone, and we do provide, I think, more coverage on these big issues than our competitors do.
What is the total workforce? You said 100 in Europe, right?
Yes, we have 100 in Europe, and we have 500 at Politico in the U.S. We have 250 in the newsroom in D.C., and we have about 50 out in the States, 7 states. Big presence in New York, big presence in Florida, a growing presence in California, Texas, Illinois, Massachusetts.
You have a presence in New Jersey, too.
Yes.
I know you're aware of the Vox article that came out, so I'm assuming that a number of people here are aware of that. An article that about the charges of sexual harassment against Glenn Thrush. He is somebody who worked for Politico, now with the New York Times. And there's a quote in that article. For those of you who haven't read it, I'd like to read it. Dozens of people told me that Politico has changed dramatically since Carrie Budoff Brown took over a year ago as the publication's editor. Multiple men and women who work for her say her standards are high, and she has no time for the kind of behavior I described, which is the Glenn Thrush behavior. If you're not aware of it, check it out. So tell us a little bit about your leadership. That's a large workforce, right? And it's not a workforce that's been there for 20 years, so it's a new workforce. It's a large workforce. It's dispersed. So tell us a little bit about your leadership within a major news organization and what you've done to earn that praise. You just left the banks of the Raritan.
Yeah, Politico in its early years was like a tech startup. So I think that most people maybe know what that means. It was exhilarating and fun and fast, and also not a place for everyone to thrive. And the culture in the early years of Politico is, I think, what made it a success. But I think it also drove people away from the organization that, I, in retrospect, shouldn't have been. And I was there from the start and survived that environment. It was a sort of a survival of the fittest kind of place. And it nearly drove me out at one point. In 2009, I nearly left Politico and nearly left journalism. because I wasn't, because I doubted myself because of that environment. And I have wondered how many other people did we actually drive out of journalism because of that environment. And when I say that environment, it's nothing
talk about that a little bit,
it's nothing like sexual harassment. It's just, it was one of those environments where like you had to be the strongest survived, you know, and that meant like it rewarded scoops, it rewarded, you know, it wasn't fuzzy and warm in a way. Like you had to be able to compete, and that was good. Like that's what made us successful. But and I did fine. But I wondered for a long time whether you could have a baby there. Like, could I have a child and work at Politico? And I ended up having a child in 2012, and they were wonderful. You know, by that point, I think they started changing the culture of Politico, and there was recognition that it was a place where, you know, there needed to be more balance in the workplace, and there needed to be certain structures in place. I'm not being very sort of, it's almost hard to describe it in some ways, but I just saw the environment of Politico and loved it in a lot of ways, and also disliked it in a lot of ways. And by the time I went to Europe, I was able to create a Politico newsroom that fostered what I thought was a culture where people felt respected, valued, supported. They high expectations. They worked hard, but I also knew when to take the gas off the pedal and recognize that a newsroom needs to have a whole bunch of different kinds of folks in it, that we can't just operate at one speed. And I guess when I came back here, I think Politico in the early years was also known for some, you know, there was behaviors that, you know, I don't like it when people don't treat people well. And I don't think that people have to be an asshole to succeed. I think actually assholes don't succeed. And I don't like to hire them, and I don't like them around me. And I'm not sure that, you know, I think there were, you know, the founders have said that maybe sometimes they tolerated assholes because they were talented, and kept them around. And I don't think we need to do that. I think we need to create an environment where people, first of all, I don't like going to work and being around people I don't like, who aren't good people. Like, who wants to go to work and be around people who aren't good people? And so you don't have to accept that. And I think that when I came back last year, I thought I had a lot of trepidation about coming back. And for those reasons, that it's a tough I felt it was a tough newsroom to lead, and, you know, there's a lot of turnover, and all these thoughts, right? And then, but I thought, you know what, if I don't compromise on the notion that people who are good people, you know, you want to be surrounded by good people. If I stuck to that and created a leadership team where that was our mantra, that you're good to each other, then that it'll be okay. And I don't think that was just something I wasn't going to compromise on. And I think a year later, that by a newsroom seeing that you can support, you be supportive, you can be a kind person, and you can still do really good journalism and beat the competitors, that is a great place to be. And it's just something that I think people have recognized maybe was a change from the past.
So does that make it a very, very different newsroom from almost any other newsroom? I mean, I think of newsrooms as very tough, competitive, not the kind of values you're talking about. People might articulate them, but not be able to live by them in that atmosphere.
Yeah.
And how do you make that happen? When someone's being an asshole, what do you do?
Yeah, I say stop being an asshole. Like,
and then they just stop?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so all the newsrooms I've been in have been wonderful, you know, and I think maybe that's why that informs me. Like, newsrooms are great places to be. They can be rough and tumble, whatever, but like, by and large, I've been part of fantastic newsrooms. Even in the early years of Politico, it was a great, fun place. I just think we had a couple of people who I think, you know, didn't drove some folks out that I didn't like. So I wouldn't say that we all sit around every day like kumbaya, but I think what we do is laugh, and I am very clear when like something doesn't meet my expectations, but we do it in a way that's like respectful and supportive. I just don't feel the need to berate people or send nasty emails. I'll walk up to them and talk to them about it. And when people behave badly, like I had a meeting on Monday with the newsroom, and just said I have expectations that like there's not bad behavior. I don't like when people yell at others. I don't like nasty emails being sent. And I just think I have to, repeat that, and that's my expectation. When people don't do that, I look poorly upon it, and I tell them that. And when I have somebody in the newsroom who's not living up to that, like, we have talks. And it's never going to be perfect, but I think if you set an expectation, then...
Do you fire them?
No.
I want to know how far this goes.
Yeah. No,
You don't?
No, I haven't had to fire anybody. I've only been in the... I've had to fire people for bad tweets that have been... There was that in the early part of my tenure, people who tweeted things that were sort of crossed a line. But I haven't had to fire people necessarily for bad behavior so far. Stay tuned. I'm just joking. I'm just joking.
I don't know. They're giving you an easy time if they're not behaving badly enough for that. All right, let me switch a little bit for a few minutes, and then we'll get to opening it up. But let me switch a little bit to the whole issue of the media now and how confusing it is to so many people, and what's real and what's not real, and this thing about we all know the language of this now, fake facts and don't believe these. And how do you deal with that? How do you even talk about it in the newsroom? How does it get processed so that you're meeting standards that you respect, but also dealing with all the toxic stuff in the atmosphere?
Yep. So I mean, our response is that we do our jobs, and that is, in my view, the best way to counteract the notion that there's fake news. We have to. Whenever at any point in my career, if I made a mistake, I was obviously devastated, really devastated. Sometimes I wouldn't sleep if I made a mistake. But I don't think the stakes didn't feel as high as it does now. We're under a microscope. Our credibility is being questioned. We've never had great poll numbers, but they're really low. But at the same time, the best way to counter all of that is by doing really good journalism and finding out facts and presenting it in a transparent way and providing the proper context, and keep doing it every day. And I think when you do that, it's hard to argue with facts. And I know people still are arguing with facts, and I get that. But all I know that I can do, the only thing that I can do is make sure that my journalists are doing their job as best as they can, that I am setting high standards for the sourcing, that I'm looking at what we're doing and making sure that it's airtight. And
how do you check that?
I have to. There's some trust involved, in trusting my reporters. We do make sure that we have as many sources as we can. You see this trend, where we're saying 20 sources said something, 7 sources said something. I'm always pushing for as many sources as we can and there's something about it that I just sort of know when it feels like it's solid enough. It's an art. It's not like a science. It's very much an art, depending on the reporter who does the story, understanding the process they went through. There's a bit of trust involved, and we're probably always sort of, on a tightrope, and we could fall off at some point. But I do feel good about what we've been able to do this past year in breaking news and making it airtight and having an impact. And I think the only thing we can do to combat the fake news trend is just keep doing our jobs and having a newsroom that is as well-resourced, aggressive, driven by accountability journalism. That is what we have to do, and I believe that we are doing that, and we will continue to do that.
So we've had speakers here, and some actually can think of one very well-known journalist, but it's almost been a pretty consistent theme, telling students especially, but everybody, to watch, read media from outside our personal comfort zone. Do you recommend that? And do you think it changes views or just confirms biases? And do you think it's realistic? And I can, sort of personally, I know I'm supposed to do that, but it's very hard for me to watch something else. I might switch just to take a fast look, but then I want to hear the news and the point of view and so forth that feels comfortable to me. So how realistic is it to make that suggestion? Should we be telling our students to do that? Because I don't think they do it.
I think that we should. I think we should make that a goal. I know it's hard to live up to.
Do you do it?
Absolutely.
How much time do you spend on Fox?
I do. I do put it on in my office. I have a Twitter feed that is, has a range of views. On purpose, and that is really a way that I consume a lot of my information is through my Twitter feed. And so I follow people from all across the spectrum, and you do get a sense of what everybody is thinking by doing that. It's a bit of a bubble, but still, even though there are a range of voices, Twitter is still a bubble. I do watch Fox, and I do watch MSNBC, and I do read National Review, and I do look at Huffington Post or Vox or any of the others. I think it's important. I don't have enough time to consume all that, but I do think it should be an expectation that we try to do that. I think it's increasingly easier to not do that. But I think if we sort of want to be informed citizens and understand that there are lots of different viewpoints out there, then I think we have to do that. And
does it result in confirming your point of view or changing your point of view? How often? As I said at dinner, I don't really have points of view that much. Really?
At all. Yeah, no. I've said this before, where I think I've been a journalist for 20 years, that I really think I sometimes lack opinions on anything. I don't have opinions anymore. I really don't. My parents can vouch for me that I don't actually really talk about politics from a perspective of any sort of personal viewpoint.
Of having an opinion? So you don't make a judgment personally, apart from your job, about something you see that's happening?
In my head, but I rarely express it.
Well, that's an opinion.
Yeah, but I don't really express it. I really do suppress it in a way that's bizarre, I think. I think it's pretty bizarre in a way, but it's very much who I am. And I think that's probably why I'm a journalist of this kind and not a sort of more advocacy-driven journalist. It's, I do try to think that I think I have to do that because I do believe leading a news organization in this day and age, you have to constantly test assumptions and force other people to test assumptions that they have. And I think it's increasingly difficult to do that because you can just go into your own lane and your own points of view, and it's hard. But I do think it's my goal to just...
So what keeps you awake at night?
I worry, what keeps me awake at night, whether we're finding out the real story of things, and what my competitors are doing. The news environment and the cycle is so quick that we have great tips and great stories, and I just want us to win every time. I am a very competitive person, and I hate it when we have something and, the Times or the Post or any other news organization beats us to it. And I really view that as a mark on me when that doesn't, when we don't get something first. So I worry about that a lot, and I really view it as on me to make sure that we are as indispensable as we can be. And so on the news side, that keeps me up. On the other side of my job, which is worrying about the health of our business, I'm thinking about revenue figures and I think about business opportunities, and are we evolving, and what are we doing? What is the next thing that we have to do? And I worry about that. I like that, but I that keeps me up at night too. Because I want to grow. I want to be a part of a growing news operation. That's what I've always loved about Politico. It's growing. It's vibrant. And I spent 10 years in the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Hartford Courant that were retracting, and I did not see a future in journalism when I was at the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Hartford Courant. They were great newspapers, but they were laying people off all the time. Now I'm leading a newsroom that's never had layoffs, and I never want to have layoffs at Politico, and that means a lot to me, and I have to make sure that I'm doing everything right to make sure that that never happens. And it's hard. Digital advertising is volatile and everything else, and so I worry about that. I mean, we're doing well, but you just never know what's going to happen 6 months down the road. Who knows?
So, and that's institution building. That's
it is. Yes,
transferable to.
And then also just I think I worry about the health of journalism in this environment, and are we capturing the moments as well as we can? Today was a wild day for news. And I do wake up every day like everybody in this newsroom, in this hall, not in the newsroom, and I get the tweets on my phone and think, how are we going to properly capture sort of what's going on right now? And that's another thing that I'm constantly trying to figure out.
What's the best story you ever worked on?
So it depends. Me personally, or my news organization?
You.
Yeah. So I think it was covering, honestly, the healthcare bill back in 2009 and 10. It was a new thing for me. Politico had just come off writing just about politics in 2007 and 2008, the presidential campaign, and we were trying to figure out whether Politico could exist in a world where there wasn't a presidential campaign. Politics wasn't, sort of campaigns weren't driving the news cycle, and so I went and decided I would cover how President Obama was trying to pass health care on the Hill. And it was a great story because, it had every element you could ever want, trying to vanquish, decades of attempts by Democrats to pass a universal health care bill, the Clinton, the ghosts of Clinton for Obama deciding to do this versus other things, the push of, Republicans to resist everything. And at the same time, something actually did pass and something actually did go into law. And I covered that thing from start to finish, and really that sort of reporting led to what we then created was, 16 policy verticals that then, support 50% of our business. So, but I would say just the story itself was a great one, and one that, we haven't really seen since then in terms of a massive piece of legislation, moving through Washington, that just, it's really doesn't happen that much anymore. And so I felt really lucky to be writing about that, seeing that. Covering the White House was a tremendous experience. Traveled all over the world with President Obama, which was a fascinating thing, and I felt very lucky to have that view on the presidency. Sat in Buckingham Palace all day because I was a pool reporter when he, met with Queen Elizabeth, went to Saudi Arabia, and ended up taking pictures of the royal palace in the desert that no one had ever seen before, and tweeted out these photos. And it was like an international event because people of Saudi Arabia had never seen the king in that way. And as an American journalist, we had no restrictions on what we could do when we went to this palace. And it really showed the power of what journalists can do, what social media can do, and the response was amazing, and it felt very sort of special and to be a part of that in some weird way. I showed Saudi Arabia, how their king lived, and it was mostly gratitude towards me, not anything else, and it was a pretty wild experience.
How did they, I've
Okay.
read about that story. How did they react to the fact that you had taken those pictures and they were out there?
There was no.
It was pretty closed,
What's that?
pretty closed
Yeah,
at that time, right?
it's almost remarkable in some ways. There was no. I was only in the country for about 15 or 20 hours. Managed to do quite a bit of damage in that period of time. I had people. There were people who were actually showing up at the hotel where I was at, looking for me. But it was to thank me.
Oh, I was
which
going to
weird.
say, what were they looking for?
No, and that freaked me out because people were telling me that the people, two people who were standing outside, there were two different groups of people who came up to them asking to see me, and that freaked me out a little bit. But it was to say thank you, and I thought that was pretty
For
interesting.
showing what it looked like?
Yeah. So I don't know. It was good that I felt like I started getting really super paranoid by the last few hours. I was in Saudi Arabia, like really paranoid in a strange, weird way. But then we took off, and it was fine. And I got out of the country. And I had like 75% of my Twitter followers for a couple of years were all from Saudi Arabia. I think that's now changed, but it was kind of funny. Yeah.
So
Fun.
Okay, so I'm going to do one more because that was at least what I've read about and you've talked about. That was one incredibly famous story about you and your experience as a journalist. And the other one was, I think, as a student reporter, right, asking President Clinton about "Don't ask, don't tell." You want to tell that story,
Yeah.
and then we'll open it.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of these stories of like, if I hadn't been at Rutgers, like this never would have happened. But it was in I guess it was the spring of 1995 when Republicans had gotten into Congress, Newt Gingrich, and he was trying to dismantle a lot of government programs, and one of them was he was trying to do some stuff on higher education. So President Clinton, who, in retrospect, this was a pretty smart thing to do, he called all the 100 college editors from across the country to Washington. And we had this day-long program where we met all these cabinet secretaries, asked them questions, and then they ended the day with a news conference with him in the West, in the room where they always do the press conferences, and he did this news conference where there's 100 college editors sitting in the audience, and he was taking questions from everybody. And I kept shooting up my hand to get a question. I think I had a question, but by the time he called on me, and I'm like 18 or 19, and been a journalist for all of like 6 months or something, and had this question though. It was like, I was going to ask the question, which was about don't ask, don't tell, and how it was in conflict with ROTC programs on college campuses. It conflicted with anti-discrimination policies on college campuses. I was going to ask him how colleges can resolve this conflict, and he looked at me, and by the time he called on me, I didn't have the question in front of me, so I just was like probably rambling, and he looked at me and he goes, "I don't understand," and I was like, so I was like, okay, and I rephrased it, and he's like, "I don't think you have it right." And I was like, and he went on to say how it's not in conflict, but he acknowledged for the first time that "Don't ask, don't tell" was flawed. And I could have felt like the world stopped. I was like, my journalism career is over. Like, I just got shut down by the President of the United States. This is so embarrassing. Oh my God. And turns out that I got news out of him. I was the only one to get news out of him. The Washington Times wrote a story about how I got news out of him. When I saw him in the receiving line afterwards, he apologized to me for not understanding my question and continued to explain to me why it was not the case, though. Turned out that I actually did it was a learning experience. I realized, no, I did okay. And I think the funny thing was my mom was sleeping, and it was on C-SPAN, and she woke up because she heard me talking, which was a very funny thing. So all in all, it turned out okay.
That's great. All right, well, we are open for some questions, and I think Danielle has the mic, so if you would wait for her to come over, she'll hand you the mic, and please. But no speeches? Questions? Good.
Would you like to call on the first
Yeah.
questioner? Or-
There's somebody here in the first row? Yeah. Yes, please, introduce yourself.
Bob Fitzpatrick, Eagleton undergraduate associate 89, fellow 90, and with my wife, Kathy Hahn, also Eagleton, and our daughter, all three Rutgers graduates. A lot of the attention in this conversation tonight, and really in my own news feed, is the stuff that happens at this level, at the top of the org chart, politically, the sport of it, sometimes the substance of it, but also the top of the visibility meter. You talked about embedding, I think you said dozens of people in executive agencies, and that you mentioned a vertical. I didn't understand
Sure.
but it's part of your business plan.
Yep.
I can't help but wonder, while all this crazy is going on up here, what's being taken apart in the executive agencies, and where does Politico fit into that, and how does that work on the news side and the business side for your organization?
So yeah, so what we have is we have this service called Politico Pro, which is made up of about 125 reporters and editors, 16 verticals, meaning that we cover almost every facet of the economy. We have a healthcare vertical, e-health, cyber, technology, energy, transportation, almost any agency you can think of, people who cover the FCC, FERC, all of these agencies. And people pay, not people, the organizations, it's primarily trade associations, members of Congress, the federal government, pay, $6,000, $7,000 to get six seats, six subscription, six sort of access passes to get our journalism that goes very deep. It's policy journalism that is looking at all those things you just asked. Now, I guess to your point, though, like these people are paying a lot of money to get that. We take some of that onto our free site if it rises to sort of a more general interest political audience. But what we do is we cover the nitty-gritty of what goes on in the federal government. And we have, 15 people who just cover, the healthcare and the agencies, HHS, providers, all of these. And then we've invested heavily in that, and nobody does that to the extent that we do that. There are lots of trade publications. We do have competitors who do that, but when you marry that with the strength we have covering the big institutions in Washington, the White House, Congress, political campaigns, and then we have 50 people in Brussels covering that regulatory capital in the same way, which is extraordinarily important right now and having a big impact on what America's doing, right? So when you have all of that, you have this sort of depth of understanding of what's going on there, and I think it's paid off. And I say that, one of the stories we broke a couple months ago was about Tom Price taking those private jets, and that was 2 reporters who cover HHS, and they did that because they had sources in HHS. We've invested in people making, understanding what's going on in these agencies, and they only got that story because people knew them and they were trusted and they worked really hard to get that. And as we know, he was spending hundreds of thousands of dollars doing something he shouldn't have been doing. And that only happens when people, when news organizations invest in that type of reporting. And we have stories like that all the time. Maybe not to that level. We have stories of that kind all the time because we have made the investment in people finding out information in these, in these agencies, and that's. And to the business question, that part of our business has grown by 20-25% every year because people feel like they need to understand what's going on, and we have put the resources there for people to understand what's going on, and that's extraordinarily valuable, and it's showing in terms of people being willing to pay for that, and so. I feel very lucky that we have a subscription service that's thriving because, as we know, the New York Times and the Washington Post, people are buying, people are paying for journalism. We don't have a consumer-facing subscription, but what we do have is this high-end subscription service that allows the rest of my newsroom to do a lot of great work too. Thank you. Whomever, you want to go? Yeah. Yeah, right here.
No, hang on.
Hi, my name is John. I'm a Rutgers undergrad 2010 alum. Rutgers Law, currently my second year in Newark. Fellowship hopeful. I'm wondering about James O'Keefe, another one of our fellow alums, and how he likes to do certain things to the news, and how organizations like yours and mainstream or more mainstream media can affect public conception of how he does things, how he can expose that more, kind of like how WAPO did recently.
Yeah, I mean, I think what happened this week with the Post was an amazing example of good journalism, and
Just fill it in a little bit in
so
case there are a couple.
if so James O'Keefe does these undercover sting operations and tries to trap journalists in places saying things that they shouldn't say. His mission is to expose the lies and deception of the mainstream media, and the Post was on to him. They were peddling a person who was trying to making false accusations about Roy Moore. The hope was that the Post would just take those accusations and publish them, and of course they didn't, because that's not what happens. That's not the way journalism works. And managed to turn the tables on him, and went to his office and did a sort of gonzo video situation, and it was I mean, I was very proud of what the Post did, and proud of that they comported themselves so brilliantly, and I think that's the way that we make him look irrelevant. But that's what we do every day. In fact, journalists work really hard to make sure that things are correct and accurate and fair. That's what we do every single day, 100 times a day. And it's great that when people can see that that's the case, when we try to take people behind the scenes of what we do. I think that's the transparency is really important right now, giving people access to understanding how we report stories, why we report stories. And I think if we do more of that, we can blunt some of that. I mean, I don't know what this is going to look like in 5 years. My hope is that we move past this as a country where we're saying everything is fake news, and the only thing I can control in the time is the 250 journalists in my newsroom, and make sure that we do our job as best we can every day, and show every day that journalism is a force for good.
So you think people who saw that this week came away from that more with the attitude that you have, thank goodness they did it and they found it, or more with the attitude of, look at what's going on and I can't really count on what I'm reading because this is happening?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certain that there were, 30 to 40% or more, I don't know, 30 or 40% of the country who still thought that the Post was doing something that wasn't on the up and up, and believe, James O'Keefe. And I think that, I don't know, I think we're just sort of maybe, like you said, reaffirming our existing worldviews on these things. I don't know. I mean, I do think that the more cases of this, it's good for journalism, what happened this week. I think it's good for us that the Post did that. It's hard to argue with what happened, but there are people, yes, there are people who probably looked at that and saw something different.
Yeah, let's go to the back.
Oh, yeah. Where was that? Yeah. Where?
Hand up in the back.
Yeah.
Hi, Alexandra Walzak, Rutgers grad and current employee. My question is about net neutrality, and if they're going to get rid of net neutrality, how do you think that'll affect your organization and also news reporting overall and accessibility?
So, plug for Politico, we broke that story last week that the FCC is going to get rid of the rules. So I think that is going to happen. I don't really know what it means. I actually don't really know what it means for me. I have not thought that much about it. I just have thought about it in terms of a news story that I want to make sure that we're ahead of and that we're explaining. So I don't have an opinion about it that I think I would express. And it seems like the final decision won't be made for a few more weeks. I think who knows what will happen between now and then. But it's wild to think that there could be different, speeds and different payments for that. And I should probably think a little bit harder about it, what it means for our business. But I think that maybe that goes to my lack of opinions. I do think of it more just as a story. So, but thank you for putting it on my radar.
She's just demonstrating what she's saying about herself, right?
Do you want to do in the
Yeah.
middle here?
Mhm.
Where was that thing?
Yes, Beth Heyer from the League of Women Voters in the Morristown area. A lot of us are veterans, if you will, of a news environment where nobody had any clue what Edward R. Murrow, John Chancellor, Walter Cronkite, Tom Brokaw, any of their personal viewpoints were. You used the term viewpoint a number of times in your conversation. How do you balance this whole idea of keeping your news neutral and dealing with the advocacy, the push to advocacy? And is that what really is behind this idea that people are concerned about, this idea of fake versus real news, is the introduction of advocacy into news reporting?
Mm-hmm. I think that's probably part of it. I mean, journalism has changed, like what's acceptable has changed. I remember 10 years ago when I first got to Washington, the idea of expressing an opinion on MSNBC or CNN or Fox, wherever you were, as just a journalist who covered the White House or Congress, like it just seemed like that would never happen. And we see it a lot more where journalists who are covering, who are just news reporters expressing opinions or providing analysis that sort of veers close to that. I see that a lot, and the environment has changed. I think we see it on Twitter a lot, opinions being expressed. And so for me, I believe that we need to call balls and strikes, but we need to do it through fact-based reporting and analysis. It should not be done through gratuitous opinions. And I don't think anybody would look at my site, our news organization, any day and say that we don't call balls and strikes. I have pushed my newsroom a lot to restrain itself on other platforms, on Twitter, on Facebook, that we're a nonpartisan news organization, and we need to comport ourselves like we're a nonpartisan news organization. And that means that if you're going to be on Twitter and you're going to post tweets, that you need to do it based on, your own reporting and analysis. We don't need to just express our viewpoints. That's not what we do. And there's a lot of people who have a lot of opinions. You can find an opinion anywhere these days. What you don't have enough of is reporters, people with information, sharing information and finding it out. And I have a newsroom of 250 people who can go have the luxury, the great privilege of going and finding out information and sharing it with millions and millions of people. That's what our value is, and that's what I urge my reporters to do. And any platform, no matter where they are, is to use the power of their positions to find out information and share that with the world. And I think that's what makes their voices unique, and I constantly urge them to stay in that space and not cross into just sort of the gratuitous opinion-driven, debate and chatter out there, and in the journalism we produce. That we need to be, like I said, call balls and strikes. But be mindful that we have a credibility. There's there's people questioning our credibility, and when we, as a nonpartisan news organization, don't live up to that, that's that hurts all of us. And I know that's not there's people who disagree with me on that, but I believe strongly in that. Yeah, thank you. Can I go over here?
Okay.
Yeah,
I think we have a faculty question over here. You want to take one?
I can't see that, so Danielle, yeah.
Kelly DeBar, I'm at the Center for American Women in Politics, and I was just curious about, in light of the news of late with some media members being sort of accused of harassment themselves, and now folks saying, well, they were covering this presidential election and gender dynamics in the election. I'm wondering, first of all, if you think that has an impact, but more generally as an editor, how much you pay attention to the diversity of your staff demographically and how much you think it influences how the news is reported.
I do. I think it does. 50% of my senior leadership are women. 50% of Politico's company leadership are women. And I think it has a direct impact on how we do things, both in the culture we create and in the way we, sort of assign news. I don't think we sit there assigning news because we're women in a totally different way, but I think over time it does have an effect. And I'm not saying that like a newsroom of 50% women or all women would have covered Hillary Clinton any differently last year, but I'm conscious of things in a way that maybe some of my male colleagues aren't, and I think that's important, and that is racial diversity as well. It's people bring their own experiences, and in a business where we're writing about other people's personal experiences, then having a diversity of people at the table is extraordinarily important. It's something we can always do better at, and we're always striving to do better at, and it's particularly in political journalism, it can be a challenge for sure. But that is another thing that does keep me awake at night too. But yeah, it's pretty important. You can do over here.
With a 24-hour
Could you say your name, please?
I'm sorry, Janet Hirschfeld, retired school teacher.
Yeah.
With the 24-hour news coverage, I mean, you could get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and have all the news of the day, and then 2 hours later something else is leading off. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's very difficult. It is.
It happens so quickly.
It does.
That to cover it even, I mean, where do you, it's like putting out fires. Who do you send first?
Well, that is what we do, and it's just our new normal. It absolutely is our new normal, and we've adjusted to it in different ways. We used to just put out Playbook, which is our morning newsletter, once a day, and now we put out one at 6:30, and we put out one at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, because the news cycle has moved so quickly that things are, you do need that catch up in the afternoon. It's our job to distill things, like that is what we do. We have to figure out what is the most important story and how do we capture it. That is the essence of what journalism is, and what I have to do is like look across what's happening every day and make sense of it. And it's more challenging now than I would say it was 5 years ago, because there are 6 or 7 major stories every single day. And sometimes you do feel like you're trapped in a news prison. Like, I do feel like I remember I felt this way the day that Sally Yates was dismissed. It was like the 10th biggest story that day, and it broke at 9 o'clock at night, and literally is like, I am in a prison that I cannot escape. And it is like this, and this is the way it'll be. But the thing is that was in February, and now I'm used to it. And we've adjusted our staff to make sure that we can do this properly. It's a 7-day-a-week presidency. We have a robust group of people working on the weekends, because he makes news on Saturdays and Sundays, and we have to respond in kind. It's just the way we exist now. And I think because of social media and everything else, like, it's not going to change. And I wake up at 3 in the morning and do look at my phone, and sometimes don't fall back asleep for an hour. And yeah, it's what it is what it is. You can't push back on that. It's like saying, I don't want the internet here anymore, and it's killing journalism. Well, it's here. So, but I have your sympathies, which I appreciate.
Randy, just right there.
Hi, my name is Hayya Abdul-Jabbar, and I'm a first-year undergraduate student here at Rutgers. My question is, to to what extent do you think that the stories that are covered by digital publications such as Politico are influenced by their digital audience? And how do you think this affects the future of journalism?
I mean, I guess every publication like Politico, as I started out, we know who our audience is. And it's important that we are responsive to our audience, meaning that as we develop new products or we decide whether to go from one newsletter or playbook, playbook being released one time to 2 times, we're responding to our audience needs. I think maybe you're asking the question in maybe a slightly different way. I think that we have to, given that I know what we are, I also, that we're a nonpartisan news organization. If an audience sort of wants a more opinionated view of things, I'm probably not the place for them. Or I find another way to do it at Politico. We have a magazine where we do take stories and columns and reported pieces that may have more of a slant. It's just clear that that's in a different place, and that maybe that's how we capture some of that and meet some of that desire of our audience. But for me, it's very clear what we are and who we are, and I just have to make sure that we stick to that, and responsive to audience needs when necessary, but sticking to what Politico is, which is we cover politics and policy in a very intensive, sometimes lighthearted, sometimes serious, but always, driven through, reporting and analysis that's, sort of rooted in facts. That's what we are, and if you like that, you'll come to us. If you don't, there's many other places for you to go, and that's cool too. So, next, whomever over here.
Zachary Malik, I'm a current freshman and Bridgewater Area Board of Education member. And my question is, how do you believe social media has changed journalism and politics in general?
I think social media has changed it and has been the biggest influence on politics in the last, 15 years, and we'll look back on it. It's changed the way it's made people more accessible. It's made politicians more accessible and less accessible. You simultaneously know more about them, but have less access to them. They're very afraid to say things to reporters. The news cycle moves so quickly. It's hard for the West Wing and the president in particular. Well, prior to this president, I know with Obama, they could not dominate a news cycle. They couldn't set an agenda because social media completely upends that. They had very little control over how they could do their jobs because opinions were formed very quickly about what they did or said. They don't have time to make decisions because the pressure to respond is so intense. I think it's changed everything. I think it's changed everything, and it's made what they do more available for everybody to understand it. But I think I don't know if we know really what the effect is right now. I think in maybe 10 or 15 years, we might have a clearer sense of it. I think Politico's, we rose up with, like I said, Twitter and Facebook. And for years, I think we got Politico was blamed a bit for for changing Washington in a negative way. But I really don't think it was Politico. I do think it's Twitter and Facebook and every other sort of social media platform that really had a dramatic impact on the ability of politicians to control things. And I think it's a good thing that politicians that people have the ability to impact, sort of what they do. I'm sort of rambling a little bit. I think it's just changed everything. But and I'm not quite sure whether it's good or bad right now.
Has it changed campaign politics dramatically insofar as, the message of the day, right?
Well, I mean, yeah,
the campaign plan, the campaign staff, it was all organized around who controls the message.
Yeah, I mean, and just to go to, I mean, and this president, you know, he hasn't done an interview with you know, any other news organization other than Fox in 6 months. He sets policy by tweet. You know, that's what he does. And it's you know, it's effective for him. He does it, and that's probably the biggest change. Is we have a president who speaks directly to everybody whenever he wants. He doesn't have to assemble a pool of White House reporters as past presidents have to give a message. That's not what he does. He doesn't choose to do it with sit-down interviews with anybody. He just puts his thoughts out there, and I think in some ways that's a refreshing change from the way Washington was. I was not wild about the way Washington worked for many years, and you know, we have a president who does things completely differently, and you know, I think it's a acquired taste for some people, but as a journalist, like, I wake up every day and I know what he's thinking. Like, I mean, how do we know in real time what he's thinking all the time? Yeah, like, it's an amazing time. Like, we have a direct link into what the president is thinking all the time.
Yeah,
It's a roller
I mean, would
coaster,
you
though.
agree? Would you agree that among the most visible elected political figures, he is the most sophisticated, brilliant user of new media, of
Yep. I mean, he sets the agenda every day.
regardless of whether you like what he says with it.
Absolutely.
Is
He
there any other, who would come close to him in the control that he exerts through this?
Nobody. No, he's setting new
It's one of
rules
those
every
things
day.
to think about when you're lying awake at night.
Yeah.
I think they said this morning, he talks directly to 44 million people when he sends out a tweet.
He does. But even more than that, right? It's only 45 million in his feed,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah.
amplified to
Right.
the world instantaneously. That's pretty powerful. We have
You
some
think
folks
about
over
it
here.
that way.
Yeah.
There's someone who knows how to speak directly.
Hi,
I can't see some of the, okay, go ahead.
Sorry.
It's because of the lights, I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm Kira Herzog. I'm the news editor of the Daily Targum. And just considering your history in student journalism, I was wondering if you could comment on just sort of the attack that has come under recently, like with Anthony Scaramucci, like threatening to sue Tufts student newspaper, and just, the general, like, it's sort of dwindling because there's fewer and fewer daily publications.
Yeah.
So.
I think student daily newspapers are under the same pressure as everybody else in the media industry. I think I think you guys have to do, you guys got to do everything you can to remain as robust and strong as you can, and it sort of scares me that, I think you're funded by a vote, a referendum to fund Targum, and I worry about the next time that comes up, given this environment and the skepticism around media, that maybe, the vote won't, you won't win the vote next time. That's worrisome to me. That's, again, losing opportunities to be a training ground for journalists is not a good thing. And I think the only thing you can do is the same thing I'm trying to do, which is, like, do your best every day. Do great journalism. People respond to it. Hold these guys accountable, and report the truth. And I think you'll be fine.
So why don't we take, if there's one more or two more, we'll end with
right
that.
Yes, my name is Toby Tuckman.
And if you could speak into the mic just a little bit more, we're having trouble hearing you.
My name is Toby Tuckman, and my question is, I'd like you to say something about alternative facts. I think many people are trying to get the news, they're trying to get accurate news, but it's quite difficult. Now, your source, is that accessible to the general public, or you just have people who pay Politico for certain in-depth analyses of policies and politics?
Yes, so the policy, the subscription service is a very sort of nitty-gritty, in the weeds, you need this information to do your job type of reporting. We have a free site that reaches 25 million unique visitors a month, and there's tons and tons of content on there, a lot of it that we do take over from our subscription service. So there's still a lot out there. I mean, I don't believe there's such a thing as alternative facts. Facts are facts. There's no such thing as an alternative fact. Right? I mean, there's not. So it's a fun phrase, though. So I don't believe that there is such a thing as alternative facts. Did I answer your question, or was there something else? Did I get that? Yeah, sort of. Well, let me.
Can you wait for the microphone? Sorry.
Yes, sorry.
It seems that you get different spins on things.
Sure.
From different segments of the political population.
Talking to the mic.
Washington. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
You get different slants on things. There's certain information, say on finance or taxes or health care, and you're trying to sort this out as an individual, but people take the facts and they twist and turn them, and you're never sure because you never get the full picture.
Sure. Well, I think you just have to find reputable sources, which I would consider. I mean, I'm a mainstream news organization. I believe that the big New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg and AP, and there's lots of very reputable mainstream news organizations that try to present facts as we've always understood them. You're always going to obviously have all these news organizations that do things from different ways, but I think you just have to be aware of that when you read that's a news organization comes at it from a slightly different place. But I think if you want to get what I view as sort of, as I think I know what facts are, I would go to those news organizations, and even then, you're going to get a little bit of twists and turns here and there. And I think that's just why you have to read a lot.
Well,
yeah.
You have a select group of people here that are interested, but there's a whole section of the country that maybe doesn't even care to get the information.
Yeah.
And then we have.
I think that's always been the case. That's always been the case, that there are people who are more engaged than others and care about current events more than others. And I don't know if we're ever going to have a fully, society where everyone is. My best friend is an emergency physician in California, and when I saw her a couple weeks ago, she didn't know that Manafort had been indicted. She's an educated woman who's really super smart, but she's an emergency physician at the top of her game, and she doesn't really care what's going on in the world other than in her emergency medicine, and she's my best friend. And I was like, you didn't know that these people were indicted? She's like, why are you so busy? Lori. But she's my best friend, so I think it just shows you you're never gonna force everyone to sort of be totally informed. We can only do our best individually.
In a way, I think we are those of us who are so intensely involved and following in recent times, particularly the last year or so, find it unimaginable that's the description of the world. But it is. I mean, you run into it all the time, and it's always been that way, but now it seems hard to believe, right? You're supposed to be doing it, right?
It's so interesting right now. You're not paying attention. It's like, what? Can we go back there? Right there.
All the way in the back.
Hi, Jeff Davis. One could say that political journalism is like the fourth branch of government, but it's under siege, and a lot of people have mentioned that or referred to that. Do you see this ending at some point and becoming a more normal environment, or
government, or the journalism, or
the attack on journalism?
Oh,
I do think we're in this moment. It's unique in part because the president has made this a big part of who he is, and a big part of part of his campaign and why he believes he won. So I do think there's something unique to this moment that's driven by the President of the United States, and when we don't have a president after 4 or 8 years who does I wouldn't discount him winning again in 4 years at all. That when you don't have a president who wakes up and every day and tweets about the media in a very negative fashion, I do think maybe it will change. I don't know if that means then someone else will pick up that mantle, but I think he's the most powerful person in the world who has made criticism of the media central to who he is, and that's I think why we're in this present circumstance, and that's just a reality, and that's fine. Like, I don't view us as the opposition party to him. We absolutely are not. And I tell my reporters every day, it's an unusual environment, but the normal rules of journalism apply. You still have to seek comment. You still have to talk to people. You still have to treat this as you would anything else. And you still treat this president and report on this president in any way you would report on any other president. So I think there's something unique at this moment driven, created by the president that we have. So.
There was one, I think, way in the back there, so why don't we make that the last one?
Hi, my name is Dilip Bhatnagar. I'm a freshman undergrad. So as a former White House political correspondent, who do you think is going to be in the White House in 2020? You brought it up yourself. What do you think?
So you couldn't end without having to predict, right?
I don't predict.
She doesn't predict. I knew
predict.
she was going to say that.
I mean, I won't predict because I don't think any. I mean, I won't predict in part because I think that who runs or who becomes the nominee of the Democratic Party will be shaped by what happens over the next 2 years. And we don't know what the next 2 years will bring, and so obviously the strength of that person will dictate whether President Trump will get another term. But yeah, I do think that that it will be. It's wild, right? It's just, I think that we all are questioning whether we can trust anything, the normal ways that we used to predict who would be a nominee, who would win. I think it's going to be really sort of frightening almost in a way covering the next presidential campaign as a journalist, because so much of what people thought they knew in this last election they didn't know. People who, I have a reporter who I hired from National Review, who's a conservative publication. He grew up in Michigan. He went to Michigan, reported on Michigan, sort of saw what was going on in Michigan, but discounted that because of polls and every other indicator that you would normally watch, and that's all over the place. And I think it'll be a very wild experience trying to cover the next presidential race, because everyone's I think all of people in my business are really wondering what we can trust and what indicators we should put stock in. And I think it will change the way that we cover the campaign next time. I do think we will all do it differently than what happened. I wasn't in charge of the newsroom last time I was in Europe for the presidential campaign, but I know that I'm thinking about that, and I think that's a good thing. I think that we have to do things differently, and we'll see, because I don't think any of us will trust polling. I don't know what's going to happen in Alabama with Roy Moore and Doug Jones. I have no idea. No one knows. And that's a weird place for political journalists to be in, because we got to a point, I think, in this country where we thought we knew everything. And we really don't. So I have no idea who's going to be in office in 2020. But we'll see.